I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by St. Louis Art Museum. This January, when the U.S. Figure Skating Championships come to Enterprise Center, it won't just be time for the nation's top skaters to show their best moves. It will also be a chance for St. Louis to show what it's got. Selling St. Louis as a great place to hold major sporting events is the job of Marc Schreiber and his team at the St. Louis Sports Commission. These events bring not just national attention, but tourism dollars to the city that once proudly hosted the 1904 Olympics, but now must prove itself a contender. With events such as the annual Musial Awards and a host of NCAA and professional competitions coming to the city, the Sports Commission can prove it's making an impact. But to do more, it has a big ask for the city, something new for an organization that's been entirely privately funded. St. Louis Sports Commission President Marc Schreiber makes a compelling case that an infusion of support would go a long way. After our conversation, St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull joins us for the closer and explains how the St. Louis Board of Aldermen just jumped into international politics. First, though, the president of the St. Louis Sports Commission, Marc Schreiber. Welcome.
It's great to be here. Sarah, thank you so much for having me join you.
So when I reached out to invite you to come on this podcast, it turns out at that point you were just about to leave for South Korea.
Yes.
And this was not like, family vacation to South Korea. This was for work. Why would the Sports Commission president go to South Korea?
Some might say it was for fun, but it truly was work. And the Sports Commission represents St. Louis in a group called the World Union of Olympic Cities. And it's all the past Olympic cities, future ones, other cities that come together annually, all to promote and sustain their legacies. And it's kind of a best practices, information sharing type meeting. But there's so many advantages to us being there. And I always like to say it's one of the few times we have a seat at this international table where we're together with London and Beijing and Tokyo and Sydney, Paris, and St. Louis has a seat at that table because we hosted the 1904 games. So that's one piece of the significance. The other is that the International Olympic Committee and actually the USOPC now have both really embraced this group. So for us to be there and be able to be among our colleagues from both entities really helps pave the way for future events that we can do. So it's as great as it sounds from a family vacation standpoint, there's definitely a benefit from a work standpoint.
So you're there kind of schmoozing. You're there to promote St. Louis, to help people organizing events think of St. Louis as this is the place we want to be.
Yes, and another kind of way to put it is, you may recall a few years ago, we unveiled the Olympic Ring Spectacular at Washington University, and we were able to rename Francis Field Francis Olympic Field. It was significant because in 1904, the rings didn't exist. So we didn't have the rights to those, but we wanted to do more to celebrate our Olympic legacy and proclaim, St. Louis is an Olympic city. It will always be an Olympic city. And one way was through the opportunities, the initiatives we did at WashU and signage around town. We've marked the Olympic marathon route. None of that could have happened without our involvement in this group and attending those meetings, building those relationships, and then finally getting IOC and USOPC permission to do that. So that's part of the significance. And then this last trip, just the opportunity to be with our colleagues from Los Angeles, it sets the stage for future meetings that we'll have with them that will pave the way for us to connect to the 2028 games in Los Angeles.
So when you talk about connecting, I think I read that some of the events from those Olympics are actually going to take place in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Is there some chance that we could get some small piece of that Olympics in St. Louis?
So the biggest opportunity for us is kind of two things. One would be the Olympic torch relay. So we're going to do all we can to try to make sure St. Louis is on the route. And
it seems like we're on that path.
Yes, it should be. Again, as an Olympic city, we should be on the route. The other piece to us is Olympic trials. So we're right now in the midst of bidding for the 2028 Olympic marathon trials. Probably the best way we can connect to LA other than the torch relay. And that bid's due December 1st. So we're rushing to get that thing done. And it would be a spectacular event for St. Louis. The past one in Orlando had 100,000 people on the course. It's basically a 3-hour showcase of St. Louis live on NBC. So, that again, another place where we leverage our Olympic pass for good going forward.
And so it's your job to try to sell the city for these types of events. So this January, the U.S. Figure Skating Championships are coming to St. Louis. I have so many friends who are so stoked about this.
That's good. Please have them buy tickets.
But so that's important. People have to turn out to
Yes.
prove that they want a full arena for these events.
Oh, exactly. And the stakes are high for us, actually, because not only are we hosting 26, we just submitted a bid for 2030. So, that bid is going to depend on how well we perform as a market. But put that aside for a moment. It's a spectacular event. And this will be 1 month before the Olympics in Italy, in Milan Cortina. And the U.S. Olympic team will be chosen right here in St. Louis.
So this is the highest of stakes for these athletes.
Exactly. It's in essence the Olympic trials for figure skating. Long story, they don't call it the Olympic trials, but the U.S. championships this year, in essence, serve as it's the final qualifier for the Olympic Games.
So that's huge for these people who've been training their entire young lives
Oh,
trying
yeah.
to get to the Olympics. What about for St. Louis? What's at stake for us? You said they're looking to see how we perform. What are they looking at? Is it all about turnout?
Oh, yeah, very much attendance, how well the market supports the event, and the sponsorship component, too. Does the corporate community, does the civic community step up to provide support? So that's a big piece that gets all factored in.
Are they doing that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We have, it is a tough event because there's so many sessions. And I think it's hard sometimes for the average sports fan to say, okay, what do I go to and so forth. And we're trying to provide a little bit of education because it's not like the Cardinals and the Blues and City SC that, everybody knows the deal. You bring in a one-time event, it requires a little bit of education. But what I would tell people is this is one of those can't miss things. You're going to want to be there. And one of the highlights with U.S. figure skating right now is they have the World Championships took place in Boston last spring. The U.S. did something it's never done before. It won 3 championships, 3 golds in 3 of the 4 disciplines. And so we have major star power coming to St. Louis. And these are the people that a month later, you're going to be watching the Olympic Games and you're going to be able to say, I saw Ilya Malinin right here. I saw Chalkin Bates. I saw Alyssa Liu. You're not going to want to miss out.
So is it all about the turnout, or is there also a component of I feel safe, I feel like I'm treated well, I feel like I'm not confused by your random tangle of highways? Are we sort of being judged for this is a good place to visit?
Oh, exactly. You're going to have thousands of people. This is an event that draws people from all over the country. You have diehard figure skating fans, and this is a destination for them. So yes, beyond just how we do attendance-wise, it has to be an excellent experience for the fans, for the skaters, the athletes, the officials for U.S. figure skating. So, that comes down to everything from how's our downtown in terms of being welcoming for fans, and yes, do they feel comfortable? How's the hotel package that we have? How's Enterprise Center? How's the venue? All those things fold in to how a city is judged with, whether the event's going to come back in the future and whether we get the bid to begin with. And, it's very indicative. The fact that U.S. figure skating chose St. Louis shows that we do very well in all those categories.
So we had a good bid, but I have to say, when I'm hearing all this criteria, it makes me nervous. No one is harder on St. Louis than St. Louisans. And I'm sure if you were to ask, some people around town, perhaps people who show up in the Post-Dispatch comment section, they're going to say, well, I would never go to downtown St. Louis. It sounds like you feel confident about this. Do you have something you can point to? Like people who come in for these national sporting events, they're saying, I like this. This actually worked for me.
Exactly. The best example of that, we have hard data on this, which
This is not
I
just
love.
mine.
Exactly. It's not just anecdote. It's something real. We had the NCAA Frozen Four, the College Hockey National Championship.
That was here last spring?
In April.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually did surveying of fans. We did an economic impact study, but we also wanted to get their impressions of St. Louis. And this is the thing that drives me nuts about it's the self-deprecating thing about St. Louis is you bring out-of-towners in, they love it. And, just a few things to throw out from the results that we got back. We had 80% of the fans that came in for that event or that attended the event are out-of-towners, not from St. Louis. A lot of them are from the Northeast, Upper Midwest. 45% of those, it was their first time in St. Louis. We asked, how did St. Louis meet your expectations? 74% of them said St. Louis exceeded their expectations. That's a great number. We had them do like one of those responses where you go, describe, what word describes St. Louis?
Oh boy, that makes me nervous.
Exactly. So before, it was a mix. Like Arch was number one.
This is before they came. Like
this was as they arrived,
yeah,
at the start of the event. What were your thoughts about St. Louis? What would you associate St. Louis with coming in? And I mean, it was still, relatively positive, but you'd have several people say unsafe, dangerous, boring, dirty. So, that hit in the top 15 of words. Post the event, only one negative thing. It wasn't even mentioned unsafe or dangerous. Dirty came back once, but everything else was tremendously positive. In fact, safe was on the list.
Wow.
And, all the other good stuff that we think about. Food was mentioned. So what I look at when I see that, it says to me that's one of the real, it's kind of overlooked. It's one of the real valuable things about what we do is that we can attract people to St. Louis. They may not be coming here for any other reason than a major sporting event.
Yeah.
They don't have much of an impression of the community. They come here, they have an excellent time. They go home, they leave St. Louis, they go home, and they have this wonderful story to tell about our region. And it's a great way we can flip the narrative to something that's really positive about our community.
So the hope is they're not just coming in and, spending money on hotels and restaurants for this sporting event. Maybe they'll come back or they'll say something good that makes somebody else want to come visit.
Exactly. The instant revenue that you get obviously is wonderful, and that's huge. We need the activity downtown. We need the spending, the economic development. That's all important. But the side benefit is exactly they go home and they want to come back and they tell others. And it's a great story about St. Louis. And we should feel that way. I saw there was a Forbes piece recently where just the article started, ignore or overlook St. Louis at your own peril. And it then went on to outline all these great things about St. Louis. And it's so true. And, I hope more of us would think that way.
Those of us who live here even. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. My guest today is Marc Schreiber, president of the St. Louis Sports Commission. We'll be back to that in just a minute. But first, a word from our sponsor. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by St. Louis Art Museum. Don't miss Anson Kiefer Becoming the Sea, a monumental exhibition at the St. Louis Art Museum. As the artist's first American retrospective in more than 20 years, the exhibit features iconic pieces from Kiefer's storied career alongside new, massive, site-specific installations. The exhibition is free and on display through January 25th. Learn more at slam.org. And now back to our conversation with St. Louis Sports Commission President Marc Schreiber. We've been talking about the work that you do and how that work helps promote St. Louis to the broader, not just nation, but world. Something that is very interesting to me is that the Sports Commission is doing all of this work of bringing these events here. You guys are doing this without taxpayer support.
Yes.
Where does the funding come from that fuels this kind of ambassadorship for the region?
Yeah, we're a little bit of an anomaly in our industry that many of our peers get public sector support. But for us, we've always been funded primarily by our corporate community. We have to go out and raise funds that way. And so our budget is a mix of money from memberships, corporate memberships, individual memberships. combined with the revenue that we can make off of the events that we host.
So you're just kind of a typical nonprofit. You're out there with your hand out kind of at all times.
Yes. In some ways, it's a great thing. I love that we have deeper connections and relationships in the community than many of our peers. It gives us some independence. The challenge for us is we spend so much time in development and fundraising versus our peers. So while they're spending 100% time going after events and producing them, our time is really divided, and it's a challenge for us.
Do you think that holds you back in terms of, landing these big events?
Very much so. The big thing for us is it's not just the component of public funding for the organization, but it's more so the funding for the bids that we're going after. So we'll go up against communities that either their state or their city or their Convention or Visitor Bureau or some other entity will be providing funding. So, if they're approaching the Olympic marathon trials, they can tap into funds to help get them to a place where they're going to break even or even guarantee additional dollars for the rights holder. And we're at a disadvantage because we don't have that. And it's a very frustrating thing right now because we're in the midst of bids for the Olympic marathon trials, the 2028 World Cup of Hockey, which the Blues are leading the way on, the 2031 Women's World Cup Soccer, the 2031 Rugby World Cup. All of these require a significant investment. They'd be outstanding events for St. Louis. We're right there. We have everything you need to be able to win those events, except the support, the financial support. And we may still overcome it, but it's a big void for us, and it really is a challenge.
So these other regions are sort of putting up some money. Is that something that you guys have done by tapping private donors, or you're not even able to say, here's the incentives we're giving for these events?
Correct. So kind of two answers to that. One is we've gotten a little bit of help from the state of Missouri, which has the amateur sports tax credit. We actually led the way passing that back in 2013. We just renewed it this session. It helps us when we go after NCAA championships. That's a big thing for us. It's not big enough to cover some of these mega event bids. The thing I would like to see, my solution, the thing that we've sort of been pushing more of late is the idea that, we have those Rams, the NFL settlement dollars, okay? That was something that was the result of an investment in sports. So we're saying just carve out just a piece of that, okay? Just a small piece. 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, okay? And let us create an event bid fund that we can tap into, and it will be self-sustaining.
So you could spend this money, but you're going to make money because you're spending money.
So you pull out $1 million for this bid, and then it ends up generating $1.5 million in tax revenue for the city. So $1 million gets put back in the bid fund, and the city has $500,000 that just comes in and goes to general revenue. And the beauty of that is, like, if we don't have it, we don't get any of it.
Right.
So it's all loss. But not only does the city come out ahead, but we have this self-sustaining mechanism that can help us. It's not a one-time thing. It goes well into the future.
So there's a lot of people who want just a little piece of that Rams money. Have you gotten a reception? Do you feel like the Board of Aldermen, that they're open to discussing this idea?
I think we're making a little bit of progress because I think more and more over the last few years, there's a greater understanding of the value of what these events bring to the community. And I'm the first one to acknowledge we have so many needs as a community.
It's true.
Yeah. So many neighborhoods that need help, and we have to be really smart and strategic with how that all those settlement funds are spent. But just taking that small portion of it, there's just such a fabulous opportunity for us to do stuff that has a great legacy and has such tremendous impact. And I think amongst City Hall, Board of Aldermen, et cetera, I think there's more and more awareness and understanding of it. And it's something we're going to try to push and see if we can make happen.
So this is on your agenda for this coming year?
Oh, yes, very much. I mean, it's very urgent for us, and the faster we can get it done, the more success that we're going to have.
So I want to make sure that I ask just a little bit about you, because I think you have an interesting story. I feel like you have the dream job for a guy who loves sports. And like there's so many guys in St. Louis who love sports. You've now been at the Sports Commission for 27 years. You've been the president now for 3. How did you first get your foot in that door?
Started when I was 9. But, no, just kidding. That's much older. No. I grew up in St. Louis, just as you said, loving sports, loving St. Louis. And I actually volunteered at the U.S. Olympic Festival in 1994. And that's how I sort of got an understanding of Sports Commission, brought that event in. And it was the first big one for the organization. And like, this is something I would love. And I actually did 2 internships under Frank Viverito, my predecessor, my mentor. And
this was like a college internship at the Sports Commission?
Yeah. And to take a step back, my first internship, I got hired by his predecessor. And the way I met Frank was I was writing the newsletter as part of my internship, and Frank gets named president, and I have to go down and interview the guy. And that's how we first met. And just stayed in touch. As I'm graduating from college, I reached back out. They've got nothing. Stayed up in Chicago, worked on a high school sports TV show for a year. That finished. I had the summer open. I said, Frank, you need any help? Come on down. So come back to St. Louis. Going to do 3 months and then go back up to Chicago. Things went so well. Said, can I stay? He wanted me to stay, and the rest is history.
Wow. I mean, it's so unusual to find somebody who's our age. I think we're probably in that same demographic where you're able to find a job and you love it and you're able to stay and build your entire career there. Yeah. That must have been a moment when they tapped you to be the president of this organization where you're going, wow, I'm now that guy who could get interviewed for the newsletter. Like,
yeah.
It's kind of this full circle moment.
Sometimes we get a little jaded with all this stuff. When you're at something, I mean, in the field that we're both in, it's easy to get jaded.
For sure.
Sometimes. And my wife always reminds me, says, like, what would 12-year-old Mark be thinking if he knew this is where you'd be? And, that's good reinforcement of how lucky I am and we are. And it's for me too, the opportunity, and this is why, I care so much about like stuff like the bid fund and whatever, is like, want to leave St. Louis in a better place. And if we can do that through the efforts we have and bringing major events here and putting them on, that's the gratifying part, is when you get to do something that's got a positive impact on the community.
You talk about still, remembering what it would have been like to meet your heroes. I read an interview where you said when you grew up as a kid, when you were growing up, you wanted to be like the next Bob Costas. And so last year, the Sports Commission gave Bob Costas the Stan Musial Lifetime Achievement Award at your big event, the Musial Awards. What would that like to have like your hero, your childhood hero, there on stage at this event that you're throwing?
Yeah, and it actually happened to me back in 1999 too, because we did an event called the Century of St. Louis Sports Celebration. It was marked the 21st century of 20th century of sports in St. Louis. And Costas was one of our MCs. And so like that, imagine that. Because I'm much younger at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it's like a dream thing. I like, one of the coolest things, back to the Musial Awards, we honor Bob on a Saturday night. The next morning, Sunday morning, I wake up, the phone rings, I didn't get it. But then I realize, I look at the ID on the phone, it's Costas calling. And I've got just this wonderful message from Bob, saying how great. It says, pitch perfect of a night. And, it's one of those things I always say, hey, I was glad I didn't answer the phone, because now I've got this voicemail message from Bob. And so it's like that full circle thing of, here you are, you want to be the next Bob Costas, which, I'm fine where I ended up. But to get like that phone call from Bob, how can you beat that?
So this year's awards take place this month.
Yes.
Christy Yamaguchi is coming. Do you think you're going to be getting a voicemail from her the next day? Does she have your personal cell phone?
She actually does now, because I talked to her the other day with my colleague Amanda Ryan. We had to preview the night for her, and she was as nice as can be, just as you would imagine her. But yes, That's the thing we want to have happen. It's funny because we often have these big names, and I love the Musial Awards is this perfect blend of iconic sports figures with everyday people that do these remarkable things. But you bring in these iconic sports figures, and some of them aren't tracking at all. Like they're coming in, they have no idea what they're getting into. And then they come to the show, and we see them in the first row of Stiefel Theater, and they watch what unfolds, and they're like blown away by it. And that's what we want, is them to like come away saying, I'm so glad I did this. And so hopefully that's the reaction we get from Christy on that Sunday morning.
Well, Marc Schreiber, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. This has been a real pleasure, and just admire all that you and everyone at St. Louis Magazine are doing.
Marc Schreiber is the president of the St. Louis Sports Commission. In just a moment, we'll sit down with St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull for the closer. But first, a word from our sponsor. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by the 2026 Prevagen U.S. Figure Skating Championships. From January 7th through the 11th at Enterprise Center in St. Louis, see the stars of figure skating compete for a spot on the U.S. Olympic team. Witness current world champions Ilya Malinin, Alyssa Liu, Madison Chock, and Evan Bates compete for national titles as they set their sights on the Olympic Games. Tickets and more information are available at skatestlouis2026.com. And now for the closer. Last week, the St. Louis Board of Aldermen became the biggest city in the U.S. to pass a resolution urging divestment from companies that profit from war. The charge was led by a pro-Palestinian activist group. St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull was there for the debate, and he joins us now. Ryan Krull, welcome.
Hey, good to be here.
So let's cut right to the chase on this one. Was this resolution about Israel?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. So the text of the resolution, as the person who sponsored it, Alderman Rasheen Aldridge, mentioned, doesn't actually mention Israel, but it does mention Gaza. So that should be a pretty significant clue. And most of the people who were there backing it were, very passionate about the war in Gaza, pro-Palestinian. So yeah, this was a direct response from the war in Gaza, calling on this divestment of companies that supporters of the resolution say profit off of war.
So what would this actually do as far as those companies go?
It depends on what you mean by actually.
Actually, Ryan.
Sure. It's sort of like if I ask you for a raise, like I can ask for it, but that doesn't mean it's going to actually happen. You know what I mean?
I do know. I mean.
So yeah, the Board of Aldermen called on the entity that manages the city's retirement fund to divest from these 17 companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Caterpillar, companies that are one way or another, according to the activists, involved in making money off of armaments or other sort of war items. But it's just them asking the board to do that. It's a non-binding resolution, and furthermore, the board of trustees of the retirement fund is sort of meant to be divorced from politics, so that politicians don't try to enrich themselves, based off of that entity's investments.
They're there to try to get the best return for the city.
Yeah.
This would be a move to say, you've got to prioritize this instead. Do we know if this board of trustees, are they interested in this argument that they should divest?
So the scuttle around City Hall is that this is probably going to fall on deaf ears. The whole point of the board is yet to not sort of be responsive to the sort of hoi polloi, kind of have a little bit of remove from this kind of influence. And that's for a reason. So it seems very unlikely that they would sort of heed this call. And there's also just this practical reason they wouldn't do it. And I'm not the best guy to explain this, but some of that money that's being invested is tied up in index funds, which means that a little bit of it is in a lot of different companies. And those index funds are great if you're an investor, because they help you sort of spread risk across a lot of different, a lot of different companies. But you can't really, you'd have to basically get out of the index fund investing game if you want to withdraw money from like Boeing or Lockheed Martin, that kind of thing. So it would be really difficult to sort of make happen. And there's not a lot of incentive for it to happen. Therefore, I don't think it's going to happen.
So was there a lot of pushback? I mean, this thing kind of sailed through. They certainly had the votes. Was there vigorous discussion?
There was vigorous discussion, but most of it was a little bit off the rails. So Alderwoman Sharon Tyus, who's sort of, known as someone who kind of gums up the works.
Who goes off the rails. That's her whole shtick.
That's her whole shtick, exactly. She was not happy about this. She has resentments about whenever the Board of Aldermen passed a somewhat similar resolution calling on a ceasefire in Gaza. some pro-Palestinian activists, really made their voices heard, disrupted the meeting. The meeting was held in a different part of City Hall because of some renovations happening in where it's usually held. So that kind of played into it in an interesting way. It was just a kind of chaotic meeting, and she still had some rough feelings about it. So she was sort of resentful of these activists who were there at the BOA in person. And then she also went on this tirade about Palestinian-owned gas stations, saying that they cause violence in her neighborhood. She linked, yeah, that really upset some people. But then there was also, but again, the sort of classic Tyus, she didn't even vote no. She voted present for it. The only guy to vote no for it was Alderman Matt Devote, whose concerns were much more measured and basically mirrored the ones I laid out a second ago.
He just says it wouldn't do anything.
Exactly. He didn't really know what the point was. Yeah.
Okay. So, taking a step back here, last week you reported that half of the sirens that didn't go off the day of that May 16th tornado, that they still don't work.
Yeah.
Sounding like the city has not done everything it could do with enough urgency it needs to do. And then also last week, St. Louis Public Radio reported that this program that dates back to 2023 to try to help people who, have a bad landlord with like a month's rent so they can transition. And this was later opened up to help tornado victims. It still has not even been set up to accept applications.
Yeah.
These both feel like pretty big things. Was there discussion of either item at this meeting on Friday?
Well, after the meeting, the second thing you talked about, the Impacted Tenants Fund, definitely came up because, that was passed in 2023, and yet, and what it was meant sort of for people who were kicked out of their apartment for no fault of their own to kind of give them a month stopgap to have some rent while they can kind of figure out their next steps. But that became really important during the tornado when a lot of people lost their place where they were living, and it was really the people were asking questions. I asked Aldermanic President Megan Green saying, the BOA passes a lot of things that sound great. They're relatively non-controversial, like helping, folks who are kicked out of their homes. But then that just never happens, right? It's a great story whenever the thing passes out of the BOA, but then it never actually is set up. Is there anything you guys can do better moving forward? And she said that it had everything to do with on the administrative side of these programs, there's just not enough staffing, which is probably true. But then Alderwoman Shamim Clark-Hubbard came in, and her ward was as affected as any by the tornado, was directly hit. She was very passionate about it. She said that, we do need more staffing, but I think we also need some different staffing, some different people in these administrative roles, sort of actually making sure these programs happen. And I think the juxtaposition was certainly not lost on me that they spent the better part of their meeting that day, wading into international relations to absolutely no effect when they can't get this program to help people affected by the tornado off the ground. It does seem like the symbolic stuff is very easy. Maybe that's why they're doing it. The stuff that is actually going to matter is a lot harder. So I don't know. It was really kind of an indicative warning that the resolution, which ultimately has no teeth, sailed through. But then these problems with this program, which would actually help, were sort of front and center.
Well, St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Krull, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Sarah Fenske, and that's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me and Ryan every day in your inbox thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting, including coverage of the Board of Aldermen, just like Ryan just discussed. Sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine, with audio editing by Brendan Shanahan. I'm Sarah Fenske, and this is the 314. See you next time.